Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that live captioning is available during this program. Efa will be posting instructions for this function in the chat right now. My name is Saigi. I am the director of Slash, and to visually describe myself, I'm a Turkish woman with short dark hair wearing a blue t-shirt. And behind me is a white wall, and next to me is a ficus plant. I also want to take a moment to extend my respect and acknowledge that Slash is located on the unceded land of Ramaytush Ohlone people. Spirit and Flesh is the current exhibition at Slash, created by artist and educator Sam Vernon, featuring the works by Sydney Cain, Hanlon Chen, Ricki Dwyer, Charles Lee, Gregory Rick, Hannah Waders, and Narges Pursadaki, and is up until October 2nd. This exhibition is the third one in a series of exhibitions organized at Slash by independent local curators. Zoé Samudzi wrote an essay titled The Materialities of Spirit, which is featured in Spirit and Flesh's exhibition catalog. The catalog is available for purchase in the gallery and on our website. In a moment, I will introduce Sam Vernon, who will in return introduce Zoé Samudzi and the artists participating in the conversation today. Following intros, Sam and Zoe will co-moderate the conversation with the artists. After about 40 minutes, we will have a short audience Q&A session. Today's conversation, including the Q&A, will be recorded. So if you wish to remain anonymous, please submit your questions through the Q&A function anonymously. And now I'd like to introduce Sam Vernon. I will be reading the bio from the catalog. Sam Vernon earned her MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University in 2015, and her BFA from the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in 2009. Her installations combine Xerox collages, photographs, paintings, and sculptural components in an exploration of personal narrative, identity, and historical memory. Sam teaches in the print media and graduate fine arts program as an assistant professor at California College of the Arts, and Bard College as a visiting assistant professor in studio arts.
Anna, thank you so much for that warm welcome, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to Zoe and the artists. It's my pleasure to introduce Zoé Samudzi. Zoé Samudzi is an arts writer whose work has appeared in Art in America, The Republic, Sense, The New Inquiry, Verso, and other places. And she is a contributing writer for Jewish Currents. She has a PhD in medical sociology from the University of California, San Francisco, where she researched German imperialism, biomedicine, and the Ovaherero and Nama genocide. Other research interests include visual ethnography and politics of seeing witnessing, the science of race-making, genocide memory, disposability, and the repatriation, of art and human remains. Thank you so much for being here, Zoe.
Hi, Sam. It's so good to be here. So I am a brown-skinned Zimbabwean American woman. I'm wearing a kind of brown, flesh-colored, off-the-shoulder shirt, 2 silver necklaces, and I have glasses, and I have short black hair that's kind of kinky and twisty, and you can see a couple of my tattoos on my chest and shoulders.
Thank you for that visual description and reminding me to do the same. Everyone, I am a Black person wearing a floral shirt with dark black glasses and a black head wrap. So now I'm going to move into introducing our wonderful participating artists of Spirit and Flesh. And I just want to say that these artists have been just instrumental to my experience as an artist and educator. So I'm so excited to introduce them. First is Sydney Cain. Sydney was born and raised in San Francisco, California, utilizing graphite, powdered metals, printmaking, and chalk as transcendent emblems for myth-making. Her work offers reverent narratives that reveal the power of remembrance and spiritual evolution within unseen Black afterlives. Cain's work has been exhibited at Benny Ono, Asharu Kandayo Gallery, Rena Branstein Gallery, San Francisco Arts Commission, and the African American Arts and Cultural Complex. Forthcoming exhibits include Refutations at the Museum of African Diaspora and Mothership, which is currently on view, Mothership Voyage into Afrofuturism at the Oakland Museum of California. Cain is currently represented by Rena Branstein Gallery. We also have with us the wonderful Hanlon Chen, who was born in 1984 in Taipei, Taiwan. He now lives and works in Los Angeles, California. He received his MFA in sculpture from Yale University and bachelor's in biotechnology from California Polytechnic University, Pomona. His practice reinterprets the relationship between tradition and modernity. Chen employs a wide variety of mediums to discern the constant negotiation between folklore belief systems and late capitalist society. Using a variety of modern and traditional object-making techniques, Chen uses the physicality and materiality of objects as vessels for gestures that are symbolic and functional. In recent years, Chen's work has been exhibited at Taipei Fine Arts Museum, Taiwan, Newburgh Artist in Vacancy in New York, and Missouri State University in Springfield. Ricki Dwyer is an artist and educator living in San Francisco, California. Their work connects three histories: the cosmological mythologies of weaving as creationist myths, the industrial legacy of textiles as an economy, and their own path of queer identity construction. They honor drapery as the negotiation that things will never fall the same way twice. Ricki is currently holding a studio fellowship with UC Berkeley and is a 2021 Facebook Artist in Residence. They received their undergraduate degree from Savannah College of Art and Design and an MFA from UC Berkeley. They've exhibited with England Gilbert, Eleanor Harwood, Guerrero Gallery, and the Berkeley Art Museum. They have been artists in residence with Recology San Francisco, Jupiter Woods Gallery London, the Textile Arts Center New York, and the White Page Gallery in Minneapolis. They have been the recipient of the NEA Grant, Eisner Prize, Murphy and Cadogan Contemporary Art Award, and the Queer Cultural Center's Emerging Scholar Award. This year marks their first decade of work at the Loom. That's amazing. Charles Lee is an MFA candidate in fine art at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. Lee holds a BA in business management and marketing from Bowie State University. Also, I'll just say I grew up in Prince George's County, so go Charles. Lee's work subverts the narrative that Black culture is a monolith by creating authentic narratives that address issues of reclamation, identity, family, class, authorship, othering, and highlights the existence of subcultures within the Black American diaspora. His work seeks to demystify the act of being Black by showing the nuance of contemporary Black life. Lee is a recipient of Pabst Blue Ribbon's Open Door Grant 2021 and has exhibited in San Francisco. His work has also been published by Oxford University Press, KQED, Lens Scratch, and in Photofilmic Journal 7. Gregory Rick was born in 1981 and grew up in South Minneapolis. Rick received his BFA from CCA, California College of the Arts, and is currently pursuing his MFA in art practice at Stanford University. Developing a historical imagination and a fondness for drawing stories, Rick collapses history while confronting personal trauma. Rick's works exist as reflections of his personal experience while being in dialogue with the wider world. Rick has received the Combat Infantry Badge, the Hamaguchi Printmaking Award, the Nathan Oliveira Fellowship, and the Jack Kay and Gertrude Murphy Award, and has shown in museums and galleries in both Minneapolis and California. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Hannah Waiters, is a Bay Area Black visual researcher and conceptual artist. Her conceptual material art practice interests include museum studies, Black Atlantic philosophy, historical phenomenology and art history, and historical materialism. She earned her MFA in Fine Arts and MA in Visual and Critical Studies at the California College of the Arts. And Waiters is currently a collections fellow in contemporary and American art at the DeYoung Museum, extending her graduate studies research on preserving Black conceptualist erasure in relation to gentrification's local dynamics. Themes and aesthetics of both Black Atlantic philosophy and museum studies here enlarge how we think about exhibitions and more broadly archival institutional displacements that marginalize local landscapes and perpetuate the erasure of larger local socio-cultural narratives. Ooh, we have some amazing people in this group. I'm impressed already. I just want to open up the conversation by extending a question to Zoe, because we will be reaching out to the artists throughout the next hour about just different points and thoughts that we have about Spirit and Flesh, the show. But Zoe, I'm thrilled that you agreed to write the exhibition essay for our catalog for the show. And it's been on view for several weeks now at Slash, and I'm just wondering if you could share with us any further insights or thoughts that you've had about how your essay intersects with the show as it's now materialized into a physical, because when we first talked, it was, it was just about what was going to become. And so I'd just like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so Zoe speaking. It's been so exciting. I mean, I wish I could come to San Francisco and see it in person, but it's so exciting to, have kind of an idea of the images that were going to be in the show and kind of structure the essay around the way that Sam and then also me I kind of imagined it would exist in space. And it's so cool to see actually how it exists in space and to see people moving around the pieces and like standing in front of them and like being able to see them from different perspectives as opposed to the kind of two-dimensional rendering that you see in like a JPEG. So that's been really awesome. And I think you all should be wonderfully proud of the beautiful work that you all produce, because it's gave me a lot to work with. And, writing is always hard, but it's a lot easier when you have like such rich material to go on. I think one of the things now that there's that extra element of like three-dimensionality when people are able to kind of interact with it in space is like, I think that the prevalent, like the most interesting and important theme I think that came out of the essay for me is the concept of the apocalypse. And obviously it comes from James Blake, big James Blake stan. Sam loves James Blake, so I was really excited to be able to write about him. But also the way that he and others, I've been encountering like other people who write about kind of spirituality and theology and like different ways of like queering and indigenizing and whatevering the world, thinking about apocalyptic events or moments not as a kind of fatal, tragic end, but as a revelation. And I really love how James Blake is like William Blake. Do I want to keep saying James Blake? I'm sorry. I've been listening to James Blake. I meant William.
Me too.
Honestly, I mean William Blake.
I'm
sorry. William Blake. My goodness, how he talks about a multiplicity of apocalypses happening within someone's life, that it's not this single moment at the end, but it's this kind of continuous or even iterative and reiterative process of revelation and uncovering. And I think what I found so interesting about all of the works is that it's like, there's your first impression at like first look. Then there's a second set of impressions upon second look. And the more you continue to look at any work, but I think particularly the layered works that are in this show, and all of the different elements of kind of mortality, and the body and spatialities and the grotesque, you know, there is constantly something new that is coming out of the work. And I think it's especially fascinating, would be especially fascinating to like see them in space and to be able to like adjust your own perspective to the work as opposed to just kind of seeing it as a document. And so I think that if I would have been able to see the show in person, although I've seen, you know, different images and videos of the show in the gallery, I think that to me would have been the most standout, just the kind of continuous unveiling and unraveling of each of the works. The more you look at it and the more that you approach it from a different position, I think that's really the beauty of the pieces that are in this show.
Thank you, Zoe. And I wonder, because this is a show that is also dedicated to John Outterbridge, and I'm going to ask the artists in a second what they thought of a quote that I posed to you and to them as an anchor for the show. And I'll read the quote now. John Outterbridge writes, "Deep within the spirit and flesh of my being, the fretting breath of ancestor guides, the burning faith. Sacred are the visions ingrained like gleaming sermons, preached far beyond the face of my nights. Give me the courage to know the things of life, that I may be worthy of my place. Above all, teach me to share the gifts." I'm wondering what your initial thoughts were when I posed this quote as a kind of revelation towards how the show could be conceived, and where you went with that.
And this is for me.
Yes, just briefly, and then I'll pose the same question to the artists too.
Yeah, I think that there's often this expectation for artists that have some kind of minoritized or whatever other identity to always be making art that is like this kind of one-to-one autobiography, that like you are represented in your work, and like that's the really like shitty cliche of like diversity and inclusion that institutions try to do. Obviously it's not what is happening here, but I think in reading that quote, I was really interested in the kind of self-fashioning that kind of accompanies the image, right? So it's not necessarily like, what are the ways that you as an artist pour yourself into the work? But what are the ways that the work is reflective of your kind of rationale and navigation of, and like being in the world? What part of yourself and what part of yourself and what part of your particular subjectivity and what part of the ways that you interpret all of the different texts and inspirations that go into however you make art, like how does that come out in the work? And so as I was writing, I was thinking a lot about, and this is also kind of the question that I want to ask, like not purely a question of process, but really like, what are the twinned ideas of kind of creation and destruction that go into this work, in kind of the deconstruction and taking apart of the ideas of form and of genre and of ideas in the world and whatever, and how are these ways of being and doing and thinking kind of reassembled in the different ways that, or in the different pieces that were created? I mean, I have my ideas and my interpretations, but I think that that's a lot less important than what the artists have to say. And I'm very excited to hear a little bit about process and a little bit about that here.
Great, thank you, Zoe. So let's jump in. I want to see if we can syncretize the question that I have about the quote in John Outterbridge with Zoe's question about this kind of dichotomy of selfhood and practice. And maybe I'd like to start with Charles. Charles, you have several photographs on view in the show, and I'm wondering if you could just talk about these questions that we're posing and how you've sort of activated the photographs that are on view in alignment with the conceptual framework for the show.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, my name's Charles. I'm a Black man with a beard, with a beige background and a brown shirt. But yeah, when I got the call for the show, it felt like it was directly calling from my ancestors for me, because I come from folks that are storytellers and record keepers, and I was actually at the time really involved in digging through the archive of my own family on both sides. And it just seemed like that call and the quote was perfect for the work that I was already making. And that activated some real thoughts, and it aligned with like the impetus behind my work. And I felt like the calling was a responsibility for me to continue the work that my ancestors had already done, with making all these photo albums, so we can reach back and see the visual record of what their lives were like, and then, draw our own inspirations from that. And I commissioned, one of the prints was my sister, and I felt like that was necessary to draw like a connection between the past, which is why I showed like another archival photo, which is really large print, but to draw the connection between the past and contextualize it in the present, to kind of show like there's a connection with us being able to see the past and the successes of our ancestors, and that really bleeds forward into the present. So that's what I got from the quote that you sent initially.
Thank you, Charles. And you are sort of spatially next door to Sydney Cain. And so Sydney, do you have any thoughts about these questions that we're covering?
Yeah, definitely. My name is Sydney. I'm brown skinned woman in front of a brick wall. But nonetheless, like the quote was beautiful. I was right at the time had been reading Henry Dumas's work, he has a whole collection of short stories and prose that was totally in line with I think John Outterbridge's work. And the one part that stuck out to me, for one, I was like, oh, this is right up my alley. So but it also, the quote reads like a prayer. It reads like a reminder sort of like, what does it mean to be a creative, and in what ways does to assemblage, to gather, whether it's information visually, materially, and then to have it processed in our, whether it's in our minds and our bodies or whatever, and come through by this way of, whether it's painting or taking photos or breaking down objects and casting them and weaving. Like that's what I thought about. One of the ways, even thinking about it again. So yeah, I was like, okay, in what ways does it mean to like share the work, share your processing of the archives, of your family's archives? Yeah.
Thank you, Sydney. And I'm also thinking about here, Gregory, your work, because you do have a very large painting in the show that is tied directly to family and autobiographical meaning. I'm wondering how you related to the questions we posed.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So my name is Greg Rick. I'm in front of some blinds. I have on a striped shirt. Yeah, so in thinking about the quote, I guess I made that painting in direct response to the quote. And I don't know if I can, but not as like a visual symbol of the quote or not kind of uh, defining, I guess, the quote. I guess I made it in response. And I guess a piece of it that was really pertinent to myself was the that I may be worthy of my place. That particular part of the quote, and I started to think about what was my place, or what went into my existence. And then I was thinking about maybe things that kind of held me back in certain points in my life, but also had the ability to kind of uplift me in other as like a transition or a process. So I was kind of thinking a lot about honoring my ancestors and the honesty that I think maybe in some of my work I maybe touch upon, but don't specifically confront. So I guess as far as making it, I kind of made the images, as kind of like in response to the quote and feeling. And then I kind of wrote, different kind of almost like journal entries from stuff that, that affects me, or stuff that, I would consider my place. And so, yeah, I mean, it was all there. It seemed to be very kind of seamless in like you telling me the quote and me making the painting. And it was probably one of the quicker paintings I made. Maybe it just took me a few hours and then I was done, and I couldn't think of any way to change it. Thank you.
Wow, I want to know more about that, but I'm struck by the fact that some of you made work in direct response to the quote and or for the show. And Ricki, I know that you made your work for the show in preparation for the site specificity of where it's located in the gallery. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on these questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Ricki speaking. I'm a white blonde person in a pretty dark cabin wearing a blue and white striped work shirt. I did make that work for the gallery. It was pretty clear walking into that space how vertical it was and how exciting that movement could be for the scale I was trying to work towards. And in terms of the quote you shared with us, I think what struck out to me the most, even before you named the show, was the dichotomy of the spirit and flesh. So while the idea of an ancestral lineage is something I think about a lot in my work, not particularly in terms of blood, but of what I'm doing as a weaver and accessing the amount of information it's taken for that technology and tool and craft and skill to be available to me, and also how I'm inserting myself and participating in this lineage of craft. But also the separation of spirit and flesh, mind and body. I think Zoe did a fantastic job in the catalog of touching on this as well. Is something that I always encounter with like a really specific angst or aggression. And that really stuck out to me in the quote because it's something that I know not to be true for myself and my world in terms of, as a craft practitioner, so much of my like cognizance is within my flesh, and a lot of the decision making is outside of intellect and very viscerally based. And so there's not this separation. And what I was able to do in the piece that I constructed was have a singular cloth that separates into two. And then the way I dyed it is walking around it from every angle, you're able to see the same form. So it created something more cyclical with that split. And then it uplifted as well and continued upwards with this kind of anti-directional thing. So it was potentially two that became a single cloth or a single cloth that opened into a split there. But I was just much more interested in trying to materially work through what it offers me to consider the entanglement of the potential of like holding the binary of spirit and flesh together, and how that material is much more rich for me to move through with movement and circularity.
Thank you. And Hung-Lun, you also are an artist who, I spoke with you about a piece that was sort of made but expanded upon for this show. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Oh yeah, so when we were first talking about the show, and then I was really intrigued by the quote, because his quote literally, I find it really appropriate to describe a lot of ritual aspect that's been practicing in East Asia, in Taiwan, and Southeast Asia as well. But yeah, I think earlier this year I was there for 2 months, and then the idea of like making an offering for spirits it's basically weaves into the daily practice of people in Taiwan, like for even international banks to chain restaurants. There are certain specific type of dates that you have to make an offering. So growing up, I just saw it kind of like it's like a daily life. It didn't really occur to me what that actually means until later on. So I started making this idea of like how the object is actually a kind of like the documentation of the gesture. So it's more about seeing the object, you kind of like just the object on the table, left it there, somebody left it there for a duration of time. And after that duration of time, it becomes a material, it can be consumed, it can be used. But during that time, it's kind of symbolic. Well, for the people, I mean, superstitiously wise speaking, they are for the spirits, but at the same time, it's also showing other people their gestures, what's important and why the respect they offer to the spirits, but as well as their own projection, I guess. So for this show, I was working on these architectural like structures, but they are kind of carved with a traditional Taiwanese building, like a roof structure for this part. So this piece of work is actually a roof structure, and it has certain curvature and carve, not just for supports, but also for the kind of like spiritual, like feng shui, kind of like dimensional calculation wise. So I guess for this show, I was really thinking about how do I leave a gesture without me actually being there. So the sculpture of these kind of like deconstructed roof and also roof structures on the casted folding table is kind of, I just want to, kind of share that gesture with the audience and then spirit as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then Hannah, you and Nargis were able to collaborate on and Nargis isn't with us today, unfortunately, but on an incredible site-specific and sort of immersive installation in the gallery. What are your thoughts on these questions?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm currently sitting against a beige wall with some blinded windows. I'm an African-American woman and my pronouns are she, her, hers. So initially when Sam had first proposed the project, I was studying and am continuing to study Edgar Arsenault's archive and his legacy and understanding ways that Black conceptual artists have been marginalized and suppressed in this larger art historical timeline and larger genealogy. So in part, I actually was studying John Outterbridge, Noah Purefoy in relation to the Watts Tower and the Watts House project that Edgar Arsenault was working on, which was an art project, a hybrid art project that simultaneously gave back to the community while developing continuous art projects that were available to the neighboring community. And so I was really moved by this idea of, or this theory and philosophy of aporia, which is an idea grounded by Jacques Derrida and then later expanded by Reagan P. Mitchell, who's definitely a touchstone in my research and my art practice. But I was thinking about this theory, but Nargis and I were both thinking of this theory of aporia and developing this new methodology of collecting and making visible these larger marginalized histories about, you know, what institutions have gentrified and erased not only this art historical timeline, but then, you know, these neighboring communities that surround these institutions that house them. And so the project is called Double Consciousness, Reframing the Four Parts of the World, because Jean van Kessel, who was a Dutch painter in the 17th century, who was a natural historian amongst other elitist collectors and natural historians, who would, you know, venture to the four continents and, you know, Europe, Africa, the Asias, in order to collect and redistribute and represent materials and creatures and species that they were collecting and then showcasing. And so we took this piece as a challenge to then create this ongoing project, which again speaks to aporia and Zoe's larger idea about this continuous work. This is going to be a traveling installation that's going to critique institutions primarily in the Bay Area, but it has no boundaries. And it's a hybrid art project. And so this work took the shape of a 17th century work called Four Parts of the World, which has these peripheral images and then a center image that describes an artist's process of collecting. And so in the videos that we were seeing in the installation, there are videos of Nargis and I both going out to about 5 different cities within a 15-mile radius of the Slash Gallery and collecting and documenting how we were collecting we're calling them historical materials that are in the peripheral and surrounding cabinets, how we collected those, how we're classifying those. We have text in the installation. We have recordings of curated walks in these videos. We were using video and media because we're also thinking about preservation theory and how we preserve continuous and ongoing erasure. So thinking about how plexiglass, how media screens are also a form of a new experimental preservation and mode of display is something that we're continuing to work on, while again thinking about this method of aporistic methodology of collecting while paying tribute to our ancestors and collaborating with the dead, collaborating with our ancestors transatlantically across diaspora, which was really important. And we also were using really reflective imagery in our videos and in our work. And that's significant of Robert Smithson's work, which was mirror displacements and mirror travels, which we're simultaneously critiquing that work was, you know, brilliant. And we're paying an homage to Robert Smithson, but at the same time, the works continued to displace the landscapes that were colonized that Robert Smithson was trying to critique. And this work more largely can actually relate as well to David Hammond's work, which I haven't published this, so I'm nervous about sharing this idea, but David Hammond's work that's critiquing, it's stated that he's paying an homage to Gordon Matta Clark, but I believe that David Hammond's work on the East Coast on Hudson River is also an invisible monument to Black conceptualists who were marginalized during the civil rights era, which was, you know, the 60s and 70s, in which that time period, you know, Gordon Matta Clark was still creating this work and was, you know, at his peak, maybe later in his career. But I think that Hammonds is seeing this Black conceptualist neglect and is doing something very similar to what me and Nargis are doing now, what Edgar Arsenault has been doing for a very long time, and what Fred Wilson is doing in a different way. But yeah, I'm really moved by this idea of continuity. And yeah, thank you for asking that.
Well, yeah, there's so many different layers to that installation. So thank you for kind of going into your research and making things visible that may not have been articulated as thoroughly in the catalog. So thank you. I want to pass the mic to Zoe, because Zoe, I want to make sure that your questions of the artists are teased out. So if you have any specific questions to some of the artists that you'd like to ask now before we move into Q&A, please go ahead.
Zoe speaking. I didn't realize that I would have time for specific questions of the artists. Oh my goodness, let me find my notes. I actually do need to find my notes. Give me just 1 second.
I have to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, because I just had that like broader question about the creation and destruction, but let me get back to the thing. Yeah, let me see if I can find them. Sorry. I was not prepared. Okay. I think, okay. So this is going to kind of, this is Zoe speaking again. This is going to kind of go in order of the way that folks appear, or okay, it's not going to go in order of the way folks appear in the thing, but I'm going to kind of use the essay as like a guide to just refresh memories and everything. So let me start with Sydney. Because Sydney, I was really interested in your interaction with Dumas. And I think it's really powerful. And this was kind of my first time reading his, that short story. And I don't know, I would just briefly just love to hear a little bit about how you kind of translated these ideas, which are incredibly visual in the way that he writes about them, into your own visual work.
Yeah, thank you. I found this work kind of randomly through I was looking up things about Black nihilism, and yeah, somehow came across his work. But yeah, he has a story named Ark of Bones, and essentially he's going through like this, a lot of his work, if not all, is sort of centered in Black spiritual traditions, namely in the South and in the Midwest, and also like kind of juxtaposing believing and not believing, like the faith and the non-faith, and how that is aligned with migration. You know, when Black people from the South moved up north or to the West, and what was, I'm gonna quote Karen Seneferu, as opposed to what is lost, but he brings up forth like what is buried is not lost. That's what Karen Seneferu, she had an exhibition that was named that. So just like in that story, Ark of Bones, and he's basically one of the characters is uncovering or steps into this ship on a river by way of sort of like hoodoo, more or less. And so yeah, I've always been interested in sort of the juxtaposition or the tension between lost and not lost. Like what still possesses within inside of our bodies and our actions and material, and in what ways do we extract it? What ways do we reform it? I like to think about the series Ark of Bones as sort of like an archaeological work. So even like the process of working is through erasing what I place onto the canvas is just usually like powdered metals and steel and graphite, and then erasing it, taking away, and sort of, and yeah, that process and uncovering these sort of stories and mythologies, you know, the myth, I'm getting away, like trying to like think about the ways in which we the other series called Refutations, and And I think all of it kind of comes from a background of I like how you said in the catalog, what's the etymology of apocalypse, right? Is to reveal, is to uncover. And coming from a background of Jehovah's Witnesses, like it is so centered into the destruction and to eventually live beyond the body. I'm interested in what we carry in the body too. So.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I want to ask Ricki, in the kind of writing that I do, I don't interact a lot with weaving. And so it was really, it was an exciting challenge actually to like really figure out exactly what I was looking at and exactly how, you know, in the best way possible, right? It wasn't like I'm confused, but in just really being careful about what you were putting into the work and ensuring that like I was really following along. And, you know, as I was writing, the kind of first pass that I kind of made and how I was describing your work was not quite the way that you would have wanted me to describe it. And I think that that was a really important moment in a kind of important dialogue between kind of artist intention and interpretation, and how that's constantly a process that is also iterative and in flux. And something that I wanted to ask you is, you know, with weaving, with something that is just so labor intensive and time intensive, is the kind of work of weaving, this creation of weaving, is it the process or is it the product?
Is the creation the process or the product?
Or is the work of weaving, I think. Is it the process of I mean, I've watched people at looms and all of these other different kinds of weaving, and I'm just like, what? Holy shit. But then you produce this work that is this other thing.
I'm torn because I am certainly a weaver because of the process, and it's something that took me a number of years doing adamantly before I felt like I was even producing something I wanted to share or have a conversation around. So for me, I'm very tethered to the machine and to the history involved with the machine and sitting at the loom and being physically present in that sense. And at the same time, I think it's intensely problematic to like fetishize the labor in this certain way that it often is, because it has been so erased from this country and exploited to labor globally. To have this kind of interest in the way that people often are around how special that labor is within the context of an art practice in the United States is something that I'm not specifically very interested in. And so I try to shy away from, yes, how labor intensive the product is, because, you know, to be quite honest, I think all of our practices here are labor intensive in a number of different ways. And so for me at this point, it really is the product and really is like what it can hold materially. And that is quite a bit of my time, but that's also a number of different histories. And I think it accesses all of those things in a way that is exactly what the material in itself is doing. It's like really sincerely weaving together lineages that are culturally disparate as well as economically very relevant to what's happening right now, and personal and quite emotional. I think textiles above all hold an emotionality for all of us because it's what our skin is most constantly in contact with. So there's this visceral quality that is constant in the way that we approach textiles, specifically in a gallery. I mean, we're seeing it with a sense of touch. So above all, it really is the object for me, certainly.
Thank you so much. Greg, I wanted to ask about the way that your work is this really powerful kind of externalization of interiority. And I think I loved seeing the huge piece and all of the details that went into that large piece, but I also loved seeing the images that were in like planners and calendars and how that made me think about time and memory and the kind of everyday memorialization of experience and memory. And I kind of wanted to ask about that. Like, what is the decision to put it in calendars, and is there a particular reason for that?
Well, thanks for the question, Zoe. I think like so many things, like those particular calendar drawings came about by just a need, I guess, for in a reaction to I guess market prices of paper in particular. And with the pandemic, a lot of people, I guess, not having the need for calendars or planners. So I went to the store and was surprised by, because I needed some paper, you know, because I have a lot of loose paper, but I wanted some books to kind of make sketchbooks or journals, or, you know, almost like something I could, you know, hold on to. And I was surprised that they were all on sale, 95% off, you know. So I got all these like nicely leather bound calendars. And then it became a thing of, I feel like they really have a lot to do with memory and remembering each moment and how a memory changes. And I found it really interesting to try to record something from a week ago on a specific date and how it changed in my 5 different calendars, and then kind of comparing different dates in the, you know, 5 calendars that I bought. I found that very interesting. And then also, I guess, putting things in days that didn't happen on that day, or just kind of like what we lose in memory and what we gain. So I guess ultimately I look at them kind of as you know, records of particular days and moments, but also records of my thought process in the year of 2020. And it's kind of different from the painting, which is kind of like a, you know, almost like a flesh offering type thing, a visual flesh offering, where, you know, I was familiar with, you know, kind of paying tribute or giving offerings of oneself through flesh in a ceremony, or putting tobacco at a tree, you know, in remembering. So the I guess the sketchbooks kind of act more fluidly, you know, not that it's just different. It's not that they're like less than the painting, because in a lot of ways I think they're more connected to like a series, or there's more information, varying information, and more room for cognitive dissonance. But thank you so much.
I mean, I appreciate that answer, because it once again reminds us that, you know, artistic creation is not removed from materiality, right? It's like your decision to create on this particular medium is informed by the fact that we're in this pandemic and no one leaves the house and no one needs a calendar, and this is how the economy is functioning. So I really appreciate that. Hung-Lun, I would love to ask you a question, and sculptural works are also something that are a little not so much unfamiliar, but I just think and write a lot less about it. And I was really interested in how and why you made this decision to positively articulate a negative space. There's such kind of a beautiful challenge in that, and I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm Hanlon Chen. I'm an Asian man, Taiwanese American, sitting in front of a white wall in my apartment. Yeah, to address your question about, I guess, has that addressed the you meant positive space with the negative space, right? So I think that is kind of one of my, because this past couple of years I spent more time in Taiwan, because they had pandemic under control, it was really safe to go back. Anyway, so I was I was going through all these I was going to all these temples and participating in all these ritual ceremonies, and I noticed that it's a lot of gesture, and then where that gesture goes is into these public spaces, and then the record of that is actually it's the object. And then in the same time, I was doing a lot of metal casting, specifically aluminum. And then also I had like a photography background, actually. I studied photography at International Center of Photography back in New York. That was a long time ago. And then I started getting into this casting process of metal. And then I realized that it's a very gestural, tactile process. But at the same time, I don't want to romanticize that. And then in a way that I want to, because everything is actually potentially sculpted. It's like architecture space or a clay in your hand and casting the metal, it becomes a structural element. So, and then, but with a human imprint, whether you're holding a machine or you're literally your hand, your flesh. And I thought that it's, and then if you cast in the metal, I feel like the materiality kind of speaks for a certain type of, it becomes a structural material, but at the same time, it has an imprint of a person and of a gesture. And so that's how I was like thinking about this process. I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah.
It did. I think it really did. Thank you. So Hannah, on behalf of you and Nargis, I would love to hear a little bit about how you kind of use and approach kind of collage and bricolage as an archival form, because there's a way that that's both overwhelming and comprehensive that I found to strike such a really interesting balance.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that really speaks to this notion, going back to the concept of aporia and continuity and unfinishedness as an artistic dynamic. So in finding these historical materials, whether they be scholarly papers, whether they be trash remains, quote unquote, whether they be recordings that are not maybe shown under high quality imagery to kind of critique this idea of what's worthy of preservation. Fragmenting these forms of history is a way of critiquing these institutions more largely, while also creating a localized myth around these erasures in order to heal through the damage that's been done in these communities. It's difficult to speak on behalf of Nargis, but thinking about, we've been talking a lot about this idea of domesticity as a aesthetic form, as a form of theory and belonging and world building, I guess, but creating these forms in which these more marginalized histories can exist is kind of the overarching theme of collage, but again, speaking to these traditions and specifically the Black conceptual art movement around unfinishedness in aporia and what that means in order to continue this presence of, or in order to decontinue this presence of Black violence and erasure, is the way that we contradict these stories. So aporia through Derrida means to contradict a story through violence, a story that has contradicted itself way too many times, and now it's hit an impasse and there's a dead end. So ripping these historical objects apart, but also, recording their original form is part of paying tribute to those forms that have lost their lives and now no longer take that form. But yeah, I think that the idea of unfinishedness is probably the most key in thinking through just material registers and tensions between and nuances between deconstructed histories, whether that be in this art historical timeline or genealogy, or so metaphorical rather than this literal material form. But yeah, I appreciate that question.
Thanks so much. Finally, last but not least, Charles, I have a question about the kind of representation that's kind of happening in your work. The thing that's so interesting about Black and white photography is that kind of depending on what you're photographing, you don't always know when the photographs were taken. And I thought that when I kind of upon first seeing, like, I thought that like, there's one really beautiful photograph of like much older Black folks. And I thought that that was like an old picture, only to find out that it was taken the same year as all of the other photos that look like they are contemporary. And
that one is old. That one is
that
old.
one is old.
Yeah, it just was printed in the same. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in any event, I think my question still stands, right, about Black and white photography and this kind of unsettling of time, because you don't know exactly when an image was taken, right? There's so much freedom, and there is so much kind of fabulation that happens in the ways that we tell stories and create these timescapes based on the assumptions that we make of when the images were taken. Like the assumptions that I made about what I assumed of the image when I saw the date of the image, you know. And so I was wondering if that kind of fucking with temporality is a part of how you approach the archive and the way that you approach representation.
Yeah, that definitely was intentional, the choice of using Black and white. The idea, through line in my work is really the fact that the present is always in dialogue with the past. You know, we always know, you know, there's this saying, right? Like the history repeats itself. And as a Black person in America, we know that all too well. But the idea, like to do it in Black and white, was intentional. All of my more recent work was to do that, to kind of create that, the notion that, oh, it could have been somewhere else or at some other time. You don't know when or where these photos were taken, but they are all in conversation with each other. But yeah, so that was definitely intentional, for sure. And the representation part, I think most of my work, the idea is to take control of the narrative that's surrounding certain zeitgeist surrounding the Black body in our media, and how we're represented by the dominant society. And I kind of want to counter that, and to show like we can just be like, a lot of the archival work that I'm doing, it kind of stemmed from me trying to research what Black Americana is. And if you just try it, put it in a Google search right now, and what you'll find is like all of these minstrel images of Black folks. And I kind of want to eradicate that, right? Like that's the whole goal of the work that I'm making, is to show like we exist in multitudes, and we are not how we've been perceived for so long. So and minstrelized. That's not who we are, and that's not who we have been. So yeah, that's the goal of this work, for sure.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all answering my questions, and congratulations again for all of your beautiful work.
Thank you. We do have one question from the Q&A, and this comes, this is a question for Hannah. Hannah, the person asked, you described your collaborative work with Nargis as associated with the notion of double consciousness. I've recently been revisiting Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk, and know that you and I have discussed his work before, but as it relates to the exhibition title in this piece, I would be interested to hear if you draw any connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Christine. So yes, absolutely. I was thinking about Du Bois' theory of double consciousness in Two Souls of Black Folk, about this idea of what it means to exist as an African-American, or more largely a Black person, through the lives of not only those who other you and see you as a marginalized figure, or not even marginalized, just this non-represented other, what that means and looks like today, rather than when Du Bois wrote this book, what that looks like, and then critiquing double consciousness now, and trying to understand what double consciousness looks like through a framework of actually Black communism. I've been studying Charisse Burden-Stelly's research, and the way that her research is sitting right now, I'm also feeling connected to what double consciousness does in 2021. And specifically at the time when I was first investigating double consciousness, I was investigating the theory through Valerie Cassell-Oliver, who had a show, if I'm not mistaken, in the early mid 2000s or so, with a lot of Black conceptualist artists who, in my opinion, I don't know if arguably she would say that they were using an aporia technique of unfinishedness, and a lot of them were using preservation theory to underscore how double consciousness was functioning. And so the way that Nargis and I were using it was thinking about cabinets of curiosity, and thinking about the ways that species were described in terms of the way that they would multiply and reproduce. So a lot of the times they would classify these creatures, if they were asexual creatures, they would classify them in ways that were just very hegemonic, very that type of classification, that mode of taxonomy, is living on today in a much more harmful register. And so these creatures would look like they were breaking apart or being mirrored almost. And that's how they, in the 16th, 17th century, they thought that these creatures would come into being. And so again, moving through the landscape, Nargis and I would use mirror displacement. So bring out a mirror in order to reflect and create these creatures and these myths within the landscape, as a way of not only critiquing Robert Smithson and his mode and his travelogue method, but and investigating how he was doing that and what harm that does to a landscape, but also thinking about the way that Du Bois is situating himself in that conversation of what it means to be a Negro at the time that he wrote that text, versus what that means to move through these landscapes now, what it means to move through these landscapes as someone who's not represented in these stories about landscapes. So this is, not exclusive to African Americans, but I, not to go too far from the question, but I was recently informed actually that, my great-grandfather worked at the exhibition or the expositions in the early 1900s in the Bay Area and was a guard. So again, thinking about what it means for more marginalized folks to, invest in these systems of institutional representation, and what it looks like now to have, what are these landscapes reflecting now about what these systems of display have done, and how it's impacted the ways that not only African Americans are viewed or are othered, but the ways that lots of individuals in these marginalized landscapes and buried landscapes are also reflected, I think is probably the best word. But thank you so much for that question.
Thank you all. Thank you all. So I think we've covered a lot of territory here, and I appreciate so much what you brought to this conversation. I hope those of you who are in attendance, if you haven't seen the show, please go see the show. It's on view through October 2nd. And I'm going to pass this over to Anna to close us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you to the artists for your generous participation, and Zoe and Sam for guiding the incredible conversation. It's been an honor to work with all of you. And thank you to the audience for tuning in today. Spirit and Flesh, like Sam said, will be on view until October 2nd. And if you like to purchase a catalog featuring Zoe's essay, Metalities of Spirit, you can get your copy in person at the gallery or by visiting our store section of Flesh website. Last I checked, there were about 25 copies left out of 100, so make sure to get yours before they're sold out. Our following exhibition will be created by Nice Chukwuolu, opening in mid-October. And additionally, we'll be announcing an open call for emerging Bay Area artists via our room programming in November, seeking images, moving image work. And we'll be posting about that more soon. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.